So I'm just going to start up a new Muse project with a fluid width. That width is fine with me. I'll hit OK. And the first thing that you should see is, again, this plan page. So you can go in and add any top level pages you want. So you can have a home page, a portfolio page, an about page, etc. And then we already know that any of our master pages, any sort of design that or functionality we put into our master page will appear on all of our top level pages. So if you double click any of these pages, you'll be brought into the design panel. Right now this is blank because I haven't done anything, but we know that we could use this tool on the left, this sort of shape primitive tool, to create either a rectangle or an ellipse object. So we can grab this, create a rectangle that we can fill with a custom color or a picture. And then we could grab this ellipse tool, and maybe we want to place an image in here. So with the ellipse selected, we would go into fill. You can choose between a solid or gradient fill. For this, I'll add an image. And I'll go back into that assets folder. Let me find it. I'll just find some image here. I'll load this as my fill. So as we can kind of see here, the original aspect ratio of this picture is too big to fit in my circle. So I can resize it just in the fitting. There are several options. You can scale to fill it so that it will, the whole picture will kind of scale to fill whatever shape you've created. You could scale to fit it. You could do the original size. You could tile it, etc. So for this example, I'll scale to fill it, and then, or I'll scale to fit it, and I could kind of change the orientation. So if I wanted it to be more in the middle, I could do it there. And I could kind of adjust its shape from there. So that's kind of one way. One thing we sort of looked at was creating these sort of rectangle or ellipse objects. We can either fill them with colors or patterns, or fill them with a picture and kind of crop the picture to sort of match. The other way to load an image is to just go to File, Place, and you can grab one of these pictures that you're using. You'll see it appear kind of loaded in your cursor. And then you could just click to drop it in and just sort of resize it sort of intuitively, the way that Adobe lets you resize things with pulling on those handles. So those are the kinds of a review of the basic things we looked at: how to load pictures, how to create these sort of graphic elements. Muse gives you an ellipse and a rectangle object that you could use. And so you can apply all that in the design. If we go back to our plan, we'll see that, you know, all of this content appears on all of our top level pages because I was designing it in my master page. So if you want something to just be unique to the page, you should just design it within that page. So the important thing to remember is that anything that you put in your master page is going to appear in all of your top level pages. So the idea there is to kind of save you some work. Like, for example, if you're designing a menu button or some sort of navigation for your site, that you can just do that in the master page and it'll appear on all of your other pages. So if we were to go back here, the other thing that we kind of looked at is this widget library. So through here, we know we can kind of grab objects. So if we needed like a button, so I think for the example that we used a button to kind of link to your CV, or for this example website that we were working on together, it was a menu. So we could kind of grab that button. You can just double click on the text to give it a name. If you clicked on the background and brought up the states menu, you could change the states of your button. So the normal state would be just, the button as it exists on the page. The rollover state is when your mouse rolled over it, so you could have a color change. The mouse down state is when you push down. The active state is when it's already been pushed. So if I wanted to change the rollover state to a different color, I could just make sure I grab that. Over rollover, change the fill from black. I could make it yellow. That's sort of hard to see. I'll make it blue. So now when I roll over this button, it will turn blue. I can do the same thing with the text. Just make sure that you have the text selected. So normally it could be white. When I roll over it, maybe I want it to turn red. So if I preview this, so the preview tab lets you see what your page will look like on the web. You can see where you placed elements is where you want them, and then if you kind of roll over any sort of buttons like that, you can see that they, this will now respond to my mouse positions. So the other thing that we looked at was how to create custom buttons using Illustrator. So we'll review that really quickly. So for this, let me open up Adobe Illustrator. We wanted to create kind of a custom graphic button in Illustrator. And again, Illustrator is great for making graphics for the web because it's a vector-based program. So you can kind of resize those images without it sort of rasterizing or pixelating or losing any resolution. So here I'm just going to open up a new file. I could give it a size. I want to check to see, I can look at sort of this assets folder to see sort of the aspect ratio they were using was 100 by 100. I'll hit create. There's my sort of blank sort of page. And I can begin designing my custom button. So the key to this is creating changes in the different layers that are going to correspond to your states. So if you want to have 4 states, like a normal state when the button sort of is just there, and a rollover state when the mouse rolls over it, you do each of those in a separate layer. So I'm going to create kind of 4 layers for my states. I can name them, I'll call this one normal, rollover, mouse pressed, active. And I'll just make a really simple custom button. So I'll do the same example I did last time. I'll use the star. I'll kind of make it so that it's centered within that button frame. I want this to be transparent, so I'm going to show the transparency grid just so I can see where that star is. So in the normal state, I want it to maybe have a green fill. So I'll select that green color. I can just copy it, go into my rollover layer, paste it in place. Instead of having a green fill in rollover, maybe I want it to have a blue fill. And the stroke, I want to change to this red color, maybe have it be a little bit thicker. I want it to have kind of a different appearance in the mouse press. So I'll paste it in place, maybe change the fill to yellow. And in the active, I'll just take another copy of that star and I'll give it maybe a pattern fill. Or I'll give it this kind of orange fill. So now I have four different layers that correspond to 4 different button states. So normal, rollover, mouse press, active. So Muse only accepts Photoshop files for custom button. So what you have to do from here, so you wanted to use Illustrator to make your graphic because Illustrator is better at working with graphics than Photoshop. So from here, you're gonna go to File, Save As, and I think you had to make sure that your document color mode was set to RGB. Muse doesn't like a CMYK color mode, so make sure that your document mode is set to RGB. And when that's done, you could just save as. Under the format, you want to change this to, sorry. I think I have to save it first. So let me save my Illustrator file first, just as an Illustrator file. And then you want to save it from here. You want to just save it as a Photoshop file like I did with this last one. Let me check something for 1 second. So under the export as, you'll see Photoshop PSD. So you want to make sure that you have a Photoshop PSD selected. We'll call this star 2. I'll put it in that same folder that I have the rest of my assets in. Hit export. Make sure you have right layers selected. You don't want to flatten the image because that's going to kind of erase all of the work that you did, making each state a different layer. So you can hit OK. It'll write the file. If you look at your Muse project, you'll see that you have your button there as a PSD file. And then within Muse, you can just go to Now, File, Place Photoshop button. You can grab your button that you want that you created. So in my case, it's this star 2. I'll hit Open. It will sort of automatically show you the correspond the different layers to different states. So here it's saying the green is my normal, the blue is my rollover, my active is this orange. It doesn't have anything for my mouse down. So I'm going to just select that one. So if you wanted to kind of customize these, you could. So you can go through here and decide how you want this to look. You can hit OK. You'll see it appear in your cursor. So you can just place it wherever you want. And if you preview it, you'll see that it responds to your mouse presses, your rollovers, etc. So that's a review of creating a custom button. So for this button to have any functionality, it's got to link to something, right? Like you basically want, when you link, for some action to happen. Either it links to a file or it links to another page. So we looked at kind of hyperlinking. So if you select the element, you'll see this menu called hyperlinks. And if you scroll down on that, you'll see that you could either select this button to link to either the home page or whatever page you want, or you could link it to a file. So if you link it to a file, you can, in this case, it's this kind of menu cafe we were working with. So I can hyperlink this button to that file. So if I were to preview this, I can see that my button works. And if I click on it, it will download the menu as a file. Let me open up Acrobat. So now if we click this, it will open up Adobe Acrobat and we can see that file. So that button, again, is hyperlink. So you don't have to link to a file. If you wanted this button to link to another page on your site, you could have it selected, go to hyperlinks, and you could make this link to your portfolio site, for example. So the way that you link up buttons is with that hyperlink site, and we covered kind of using a button from the button widget menu and customizing it, or creating your own custom Photoshop button. So the other thing that we looked at were menus. So if you go into the menu section, you'll see that you have these menus, and you can select either a horizontal menu or a vertical menu. So these are navigation menus that let you navigate from your site. So I can select this horizontal menu. I can kind of drop it on my page. If I expand that star there, it'll ask me what type of menu I want. I could say, show me a menu of all of my top level pages that I made. So then it'll say home, portfolio, about. You can edit them together or you can edit them individually. So if you have edit together selected, any changes you make to one of these menu items is going to affect all of them. So if we wanted to change the background color, we could just grab it. Instead of having a gray fill, maybe we want it to have a pink fill, so we could do that. We could change the font from white to blue, from Helvetica to some other font, the size of it. So we can kind of customize these as we want. We can also change the state of them. So when it's pink when it's normal, when we roll over it, maybe we want it to turn yellow. So we can customize all of those states. So if we preview this, there's our menu button, and if we roll over it, it will turn yellow. So we looked at creating a menu. You can also create custom menus. So if I wanted to create a menu that had custom buttons that didn't necessarily map to my top level pages, I could grab one of those menu buttons. Instead of saying top level pages, I'll say manual, and this will let me kind of just add the buttons myself. So I could click here and link to, another URL. So maybe I want this button to link to, the school's website. So I can click. So maybe this button is called hcc.edu and it links to the school's website. And then if I wanted to add another menu item, I could just click one of these arrows. So if I click this arrow, I'll have this other button. So maybe I want this page to link to, I don't know, maybe your friend or your parents have a business and you want to kind of promote that business on your site. So you could link to that there. And then you could customize each menu. So if I wanted this button to link to HCC under hyperlink, I could link to another page. So I could just type that in to link to the school's website. So using the hyperlink button, you can link to other sites. You can link to files to download, and you can link to other pages on your site. The most common use of these buttons, though, is probably as navigation buttons to just link to other pages on your site. So that's kind of a review of how to add and load pictures, how to crop pictures, how to create custom buttons, how to work with the menu or the home buttons. So let's look at this kind of attribute called scroll effects that will allow you to sort of create some custom kind of animations for your website. So let me just position these because I kind of didn't do a great job designing this because I was just sort of showing different elements. So I'm going to get rid of these menu items and I'm going to work with kind of a picture, and then I'll create sort of a text that will go under it just to kind of demo how these scroll effects work. So I'm going to create a box under here. And I'm going to fill this box with some text that maybe describes this picture. I'll just add some other text there. So pretend that's, some writing. So if we want to maybe add a scroll effect to this, so if we look at this this example website we were looking at, they had sort of this weird scroll effect. Like if you kind of look, you can see, especially with this background picture, that picture, it kind of looks like it's moving at a different rate. So it gives the website kind of almost this 3D or, just add some nuance to the interaction. You do that kind of animation through scroll effects. So if we're to go back to Muse and you kind of grab the image that you want to apply that scroll effect to, if you go into scroll effects, it's going to say that your breakpoint must be fixed with. So you have to Let me sort of remember how I did that. I think I did it. This is the breakpoint here. So if you just double click on your breakpoint properties, so your breakpoint is up here, like how you access that is up here in this top menu bar that's purple in this interface. If you just double click that, it'll say breakpoint properties. If you want to use a scroll effect, instead of doing fluid width, you have to say fixed width, hit OK, and then it'll open up the scroll effects menu. So then you have these different sort of scroll effects that you can access. So one is motion, the other is opacity, which we know from working with Photoshop and Illustrator refers to the transparency. This other one is specifically for a slideshow, so we'll look at that a little bit later. And then this other one is kind of if you have animations on there. But just for kind of an example, let's do a motion. Let's add kind of a motion scroll effect here. So we'll click the motion button. So what this is asking you for is like your initial motion and the final motion and where you want your mouse to sort of be placed for that motion to happen. So for my initial motion, I'm going to set this picture's, I'm moving the vertical properties at 0 because I don't want any sort of changes to happen until after the person kind of starts scrolling through my page. So I'll set the initial motion to 0. For the final motion, I can set that, I can kind of manipulate these arrows so that I can change where I want the final motion to be. So I'll just put a random number here at 4.5. So this is going to create like a really obvious sort of motion. I'll hit preview. I think that was too much, so let me so now when I scroll through here, I maybe have to change the size of my page. So let me bring this down. I'll bring this down so I can scroll through it. So now when I kind of scroll, you'll see that that picture sort of moves up at a higher rate, right? So whatever number you give this final motion is going to determine the speed or the ending position of that image. So if right now, when I scroll through it, I gave it a very small kind of difference in the final state. You can see that that final image appears to kind of rise up a little bit faster than the text, right? And that's because I gave it sort of a higher position in the final motion. So if I wanted to make that kind of animation a little bit more evident, I could make this number higher. So I'll make it 2.5. So now when I scroll, you'll see that that image moves up higher. You can do it either on the vertical axis, so you could make that move down. Or you can do that on the horizontal axis, so you can make it move to the right. So let's say I wanted it to be at 2.8. So now when I scroll down, you'll see that that image moves to the right, right? So that's how you kind of access the scroll effects. So let's try an example with opacity, which is going to basically change its transparency. So instead of motion, so we looked at motion, where you can sort of change the final motion. So you can sort of create something like they did here, where this image appears to move at a different rate than the picture. So we demonstrated how to do that. And let's look at maybe something with opacity. So if we click opacity, we could say that it's going to start off at there. And we'll give it a final state. We'll just play with some of these opacity settings. Now when we preview this, we see that as it scrolls down, the opacity kind of fades. So those are two ways to kind of add different sort of effects to your website. One is through motion, one is through opacity. So when you start designing your own sites, try to incorporate some of these different scroll effects into your site. So when we have studio time in class, you can kind of play around with these different scroll effects. So the last thing that we're going to look at is a gallery widget. So we looked at how to kind of place pictures that were just sort of static. So you could show one picture, you could embed it as the background in the shape, or you could place it as your own object. So the other thing that the last thing that we're gonna look at with Muse is your widget is this gallery widget. So I'm gonna move this just a little bit to the left. I'll move this down here. Let me expand Muse. So I'll move this so it's kind of under my text there. So if you want to add kind of a gallery page, so a gallery would be something like how they have on their page. They have this kind of view gallery full screen, and then they have this sort of a effect where it's sort of fading in and fading out the different images. So this is what you would kind of call up using that gallery widget, is you would call up a different kind of gallery. So let's say you wanted your home page to not just open up on a static picture. You could have it open up, on a picture that's kind of going through the different images that you have in your portfolio. You would use the gallery widget to make this button or to make this object. So if we go back into the widget library and expand that and scroll down, you'll see that there is a slideshow folder. So there's different options. You could do a basic slideshow, and it kind of lets you preview what that looks like. You could do a blank slideshow where you can kind of add your own, sort of customize it. You could do a full screen slideshow, so it will, the whole screen, just like in this. So this is a full screen slideshow, like the image takes up the whole screen. You could do a light box where it sort of places it in this gray light box. You could do one with thumbnails where it will create this gallery that you can navigate through and place smaller thumbnail images on the left. So let's use this thumbnail image or this thumbnail kind of widget as our example. So I'll grab that and I'll just throw it in here. It's going to start off showing their sample pictures. So you obviously don't want to use their sample pictures, right? You want to add your own. So when you kind of pull this out to customize it and to load your own photos, you just double click on this folder. Let's wait for it to let me load, and then you can add your own pictures to the slideshow. So the image that I chose was kind of this lightbox option, or this thumbnail option. So it gives you these images that you can sort of scroll through. So there's sort of two ways for the user to sort of scroll through your portfolio images or whatever images that you have here. You could either do that through the images on the left, or there's these buttons here that you can kind of push to scroll, you know, to image 1, image 2, image 3, etc. And then you could give each one a caption. So you could call this one cupcakes. Croissant, cake, whatever, right? So your images are going to be images of your artwork. So you're probably going to have the title of the piece, etc. And then if you hit this arrow, it'll bring up your slideshow options. So you could say, what you want the transition to be, whether you want it to be a fade. So a fade looks like the images just sort of fade and you see the new one. If you wanted to change that to be, they have a couple options here for horizontal or vertical. So you could, let's just test horizontal. I don't see a lot of difference there, but maybe, there's one that I'm not seeing. Let's make the transition, you can change the transition speed. Oh, I think what this refers to is when you let it, if you were to preview this and you saw the slideshow playing on its own, you could change the effect from like a fade effect to a horizontal effect. You could make it autoplay or not. So you can make it so that when someone goes to your site, it's as soon as they load the page, is automatically going to start going through the images of your slideshow. Or you could uncheck that, and that means that it's going to just stay on the first image, and that they'd have to manually sort of cycle through. And then you could just either have it shuffle, so it will show in random order. Then you enable swipe, means that if this is on a mobile device, they can kind of swipe through with their finger through your gallery. And then you could also customize what you want your gallery to show. So whether you just want it to show the picture, or a button that lets you go to the first image, or if you don't want captions, you could have a button to close it. You could not show the thumbnails. So I could add a button. So here I'm going to add a button that appears down here that lets the person just go to the first image. I'm going to add one that lets them go to the last image. And then I want these two that lets them kind of navigate through the button. So if I were to preview this, then I see kind of my button sort of, my slideshow sort of auto-playing, because that's the setting that I had. So if I didn't like that for whatever reason, I was like, oh, that moves too fast, or I don't like that transition, I can just go back into the design page, select it, expand this option, and I'll say, maybe I want the transition speed, instead of 2 seconds, I want it to be slower, so I want the transition speed. So I'm going to double that transition speed to, or add a second to 3 seconds. And instead of horizontal, I want it to fade. So if I preview that, so I have a longer wait now between the different images, and instead of kind of scrolling like they were, now they're fading in and out. So you can kind of customize those options of how you want your slideshow or your gallery to sort of display. So let's check out this, instead of fade, let's make it do vertical, and we'll make it really fast, so it's going to change every 1 second. So if we preview that, now we'll see that it cycles through every 1 second, and it's using this vertical sort of transition to cycle through. And we still have interactivity with this kind of menu bar that we created. So we could make that so that it moves, or we could go to the very last one, etc. So you have different options with the gallery widget. You're going to have to include a gallery on your website because your website is going to be a portfolio page. So your website is going to have a gallery of your own work. You can choose, any of the formats that fit with your design, and you can kind of customize it as you see fit. So we've reviewed kind of everything we've done in Muse, like graphics, how to upload photos, how to use photos as backgrounds of elements, how to use photos as on their own. We looked at buttons, creating different button states, hyperlinking buttons to different content, so different pages or to download files. We looked at creating custom buttons through Illustrator and then exporting them as Photoshop files and bringing them into Muse. And then the last thing that we looked at was this gallery widget so that we could bring in these sort of photo galleries into our websites. So the very last thing that we're going to look at before I give you studio time. So again, the goal by the end of this class is to have your assets folder that I asked you to turn in for homework a couple weeks ago, to have that assets folder kind of complete with all of your design elements. So you're going to have all the photos that you're going to use as part of your portfolio. You're going to have your logo done. You're going to have your custom buttons done, and then any other sort of like custom graphics that you're incorporating as part of your website. So by custom graphic, I mean something like, so here they have these like dividers that they use. So this is just a custom graphic that they created in Illustrator, right? So they made a line and these two diamond shapes, and they exported that as like a PNG file and brought that into Muse. So if you want to use custom graphics, you can create them in Illustrator also. So your assets folder by the end of class should have all of your photos that you're going to use as part of your portfolio, your custom logo that you're making for yourself, your custom button that you're making, and then any graphic elements that you're going to incorporate into your site design. So I'll give you time to kind of complete your assets folder till the end of class. But let's also look at, we're going to open up Photoshop to talk about optimizing our photos before we do that. So your assets folder hopefully now has one version of the artwork that you're going to show. You have this really nice kind of full resolution version of the artwork that you're going to show. So you're going to need two versions of each photo in your assets folder. You're going to need a thumbnail version, and then you're going to need a full resolution version. So a thumbnail version is kind of exactly what it sounds like. I'm sure you've encountered these before when you were sort of browsing the internet. But a thumbnail is something like, so when we went to Muse, these sort of small images, like these here on the left, these are the thumbnail images. And then this large one is obviously the full resolution image. So your assets folder should have a thumbnail version of the image that you're using as part of your portfolio, as well as a full resolution version. So does anyone have any idea why we incorporate kind of a thumbnail version of images also on the web? Like, why is it important or necessary to have a thumbnail of the image as well as the full resolution? Right, so the thumbnail makes a good preview, and you want to use it for the web because the thumbnail, like basically the concern with the web is the loading time of the page. So if you have all of these high quality, high resolution photos, it's going to take your page a long time to load. And you're going to miss out, that might end up frustrating anyone going to your site, that your site is taking forever to load. So the way around that is to also create a thumbnail image that can load really quickly. It's a lower quality image that's much smaller. So while you're waiting for your site to kind of load your full resolution photos, all of your thumbnail images can already load. So the basic rule of thumb, and we'll talk about this when we open up Photoshop, is that your full resolution images, are at their native aspect ratio. So, you probably shot your images at some sort of photo aspect ratio, 4:5, etc. Generally for the web, full resolution photos are at a 72 DPI or PPI. Thumbnail images are much smaller, so they're around a quarter size of your full resolution image, and then your DPI is only 5. So the idea with the thumbnail is to make a smaller, lower quality image that can load on the web quickly. So while your website is kind of loading your high resolution photos, your thumbnail photos can load and provide that sort of visual element. So your assets folder is going to have 2 versions of each photo that you're going to include. A full resolution version that's 72 DPI, and then a thumbnail resolution version that's 5 DPI and basically with the aspect ratio kind of quartered. So let's open up Photoshop, and it's very easy to kind of export different versions of your photos. So with Photoshop open, you can open up one of your full resolution photos. So I'm going to just hit open. I'll kind of navigate to one of the so I'm going to use this cookies photo that they have included in their example assets file. And you can see if you look at the information, this is a huge photo. Like if we were waiting for this photo to load, like it's 2000 by 1335 pixels. So it's already really big. So if we were waiting for this, somewhere to load, it would take forever for this photo to load, especially if we had lots of other pictures. So we want to kind of create a thumbnail image of this that will preload or preview before the full resolution version loads. So we can kind of just open it up. And the first thing that we want to do I'm just going to sort of shrink it so I can see all of it. So I'm just adjusting the zoom here. Let me see if I can do it. Well, it doesn't. So here's my image. Because I'm projecting this, the program is responding a little bit strangely. Let me try to kind of shrink the window down so you can see the whole thing. All right, here we go. Much better. So, I have this great looking portfolio picture. Like your portfolio picture, should be really high quality, obviously. But the issue is, when I'm putting things on the web, I don't necessarily have time to wait for these really high quality photos to load. So I want to take this really high quality photo and I just want to format it for the web and then create a thumbnail of it also. So if I have both versions and use both versions in my site, how that's going to kind of help my site is that my site can load these images relatively quickly. So people coming to my website, maybe they're not connected to to a Wi-Fi, maybe they're like on a bus viewing this on their mobile device, and they don't have the fastest wireless internet. They're still able to load the content of my site. So a lot of that is going to be formatting your media correctly for the web. So with this picture selected, you can copy it. Open up a new document. So here, when I opened up a new document, it already gave me the native kind of aspect ratio for this picture. So it's 2000 by 1335. The resolution is 72. So I'm going to hit create. I'll paste the picture in. So this is my full-sized image. It's the full aspect ratio, whatever size the picture is taken at. This is going to be my full-size image, and it's at 72 pixels per inch. That's really the key here. That 72 pixels per inch is the web resolution. So I can save this. So I'll call this cookies, and then I'll add this part that says full to it so that I know that it's the full version of this picture. I don't want a Photoshop file because I'm not going to put a Photoshop file on the web, right? So I'm going to select JPEG. So I have cookies full.jpg. Make sure it goes in your assets folder. Hit save. For your full size file, you want, a large quality, so you can hit maximum quality 12 because you want the highest quality image for your full size image, and hit OK. So there's your full-size image. For your thumbnail, you need to resize this so that it's smaller and that it's at a lower pixel resolution. So you could copy it again, open up a new Photoshop file. You could do the resizing and the width and height here, but there's an easier way to do it that I'll show you. But what's important to change here is this resolution. Instead of 72 pixels per inch, you want to do 5 pixels per inch. Hit create, then hit paste. So there's your photo, but now it's at 5 pixels per inch at a 5 pixel resolution as opposed to 72. So already you have a smaller file because there's just less pixels per inch. There's less data. So you already have a much smaller file than what you would have if you were using your full-sized image. But now you need a thumbnail. So you're going to go to File, Export. There's this Save for Web Legacy function that they keep on here because it's kind of useful for saving images for the web. So if you click this, it's going to bring up this sort of dialog box that allows you to change a lot of the settings on here. So you would only really use GIF or PNG if your image had some transparency data that you wanted to preserve. So for example, when we made buttons, or if you were using a graphic, you would use a GIF or a PNG as the format to save it if you wanted it to have a transparent background. But pictures like this that are kind of like content for the web, JPEG is probably the best format for them. So we want to change the quality instead of 6. So right now it's at 60% because we set the image to 5. So this is probably okay. So you want your quality just to be at 60% of your full size. So this is around 5 pixels per inch. And then we want to change the size. Instead of the width being 2000 by 1335, this is just kind of a huge image that's going to take a long time to load. We want to sort of shrink this down. So instead of 100%, we want to end up with, so 2000 divided by 4. So this width divided by 4 is 500. So if you just type 500 in there, you'll end up with an image that's 500 pixels wide and 334 pixels high. And the percent is going to be 25. And then you could just hit OK. You could give it a name. So my previous one, I called Cookies Full because I wanted to make sure I knew that was the full resolution. So this one I'll call Cookies Thumb. so I know that that's the thumbnail. So I'll make sure that that goes into my assets folder. I'll hit save. So if I look in my assets folder, I have cookies full and cookies thumb. So already, if you just look at the info, you can already see that there is a great difference in the size of these images, both data and aspect ratio wise. So if I go to cookies full, it's 968 kilobytes, but cookies thumb is only 23 kilobytes. So that's the idea of having both a full-size image and a thumbnail image. The thumbnail image is a low quality version of your photo that can load really fast on the web, so that you're able to kind of load these smaller photos. And then while things are sort of loading, you can then you can load in your full-size image. So when we look at that kind of in practice, so here in this gallery page, they have these small thumbnails so that this page loads pretty fast. And while the rest of these pages are loading, those large full-size images are loading in the background. So they have these thumbnail images that are going to load pretty fast. And then they give you this option that you can view the gallery full screen. So when you click that, then they show you their full resolution photos. So that's why you should have in your assets folder both a thumbnail version of your photos as well as a full resolution version of your photos. So we went through the steps to do that. You can open up your photos in Photoshop, make sure that your full resolution photos are at a 72 dpi, and then your thumbnail should be at 5 dpi and then be around a quarter. So you just divide by 4 the width and height of your photos. So by the end of the class, let me just open up a document here. Let me open up Canvas, actually. So